And I said, by getting the girlfriend first and cheating on your wife, my mother, I said, do you know what kind of a position that puts me in? We can't be bros and buddies here. You screwed the pooch. And I said, you're my dad. I love you. But shit, man, choices.
Welcome to the Will and Lee Show.
Welcome back to the Will Chang and Lee Chang Show. In today's episode, Against the Grain, we have a chance to dive into a topic that I think is extremely important and relevant to everyone, which is the concept of happiness and personal fulfillment. Our guest is Joe Cha, whose story can be divided into two acts. The first half of Joe's life, by most standards, would be considered impressive and inspiring. Growing up in Southern California, Joe attended some of the top universities in the world with multiple degrees from Stanford, as well as an MBA from Harvard Business School. He has had a storied career, which includes being a one-time consultant, bringing multinational companies to China in the early 90s, a tech entrepreneur who founded one of the hottest companies that raised millions of dollars during the first Dotcom boom. This led Joe to appear on the Today Show and appeared in many business publications, such as Fortune magazine. He was also a corporate executive at Yahoo at the height of the platform's influence. However, through all these experiences and accomplishments, while at times rewarding, Joe found only fleeting moments of happiness and satisfaction with his life. It took a perfect storm of personal and professional challenges that upended Joe's world for him to redefine his values, priorities, and life goals. So with that, I'd like to welcome Joe. And before we begin, I just want to preface that both Joe and I are recovering from recent head trauma and possible concussion. So if we do end up blanking out, well, you're going to have to step in for us.
All right, sounds good. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, guys. And on that note, I was actually also hoping, Will, you could just impersonate my voice. And if Lee and I do end up passing out, you can just finish this episode by yourself.
I'll do my best to imitate both your voices.
So first, thank you, Lee, for such a great encapsulation of my life. Asians are typically pleasers. We always want people to be happy with what we do. With that headline, I will do my best to hopefully help some people who, if there are any people who listen to this, at least this particular episode, piece together how some of my poor choices will help them out by basically just not doing what I did, and they'll be fine. So where exactly should we start? You guys want to hear chapter 1? I can do that, like the Cliff Notes version, or do you want some highlights? What should we do?
I think it would definitely be helpful to dive into some of your background and your childhood. Give us a better understanding of your experiences and what you think were very important factors that shapes your life.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you already mentioned, I grew up in LA. I was born in Los Angeles. My parents came in 1967, and I grew up in San Gabriel Valley, a town called West Covina, California.
And your parents came from where?
Taiwan.
Okay.
So both my parents are Chinese. And I basically, my life pretty much is a bunch of splits because my childhood was very, very protected. San Gabriel Valley then was not very Asian, really not very Asian, particularly in West Covina. So I grew up riding dirt bikes with white kids after school. I had a dirt bike. And that was my childhood. It wasn't really I didn't really realize how much my parents were working because after school I'd get dropped off and I'd be on my dirt bike. I knew my parents weren't around. I knew they were working, but I wasn't really constrained a lot. I didn't go to Chinese school, and my friends were Caucasian and Hispanic.
When was this in time wise?
This is basically the 70s. So from the time I was little, like a toddler, to about 10. And then the first shift in gears in my life is my parents took me to like literally a Beverly Hills doctor that I don't know how they found. And I took an IQ test, and the doctor's like, "Hey, okay, you're smart. Like you have a high IQ. Great." This has no context for me. So I don't know what this means, this convinces my parents that they need to move to the West Side, move to a different school, and kind of take me out of dirt biking land to Beverly Hills. And I literally went over from one year to the next to a completely different place. That displacement was painful, but probably good. This is very interesting. Now I feel like you guys are my therapist, so I should just I'm like letting it all hang out now. So I should speed it up. So basically, I go from the east side to the west side. I ended up going to John Thomas Dye, which is a fancy pants little K through 6, and then I went to Harvard Westlake, which is a great place. In my era, it was Harvard School, so it was all boys. It was pretty academic. It was too small to have real cliques. So you could hang out with the captain of the football team and be a nerd. It was okay because you guys were probably in orchestra together. So
this high school was like one of the top high schools academically in California, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Still is, I think.
It's a pretty good school. It's gotten a bit bigger and it's gotten kind of more glam. So in Southern California, it's a pretty well-known school. But I mean, so what? So I'm an only, and I think it coincided, with my parents starting their own business, starting to do well with a mom and pop production agency, doing graphics, and basically junk mail put me through college. And that was it. It wasn't, I think, memorable or special in any other way other than, for me, I didn't stay in one place. I basically had a first half, which is pretty idyllic in retrospect. It was pretty simple. It was very simple. To a second half, which was a little more complex. It had some layers to it. Growing up and recognizing being different. So even though I was never in a situation where I was in the majority, at least ethnically, having a school that had a lot of breadth and a lot of experiences that were pretty, I don't know, I would say special maybe at the time.
But it
Those were
didn't seem
eye-opening.
special to you at the time.
No, it was just a grind because all you do is think about going to college and you don't really even know why. Right. And Stanford was just an abstraction. I had a college counselor who said, okay, here's your GPA, here's your SAT, your national merit, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here's probably like the range of schools. And I picked 5. And I hadn't gone to see them. I didn't know much about them other than the brochures. My parents had heard of a couple of them, so they were really excited by that. To them, I think they were just abstract concepts that sounded really good. So that was that.
Okay. So it sounds like your parents were very supportive. Just to get a little bit of color on the dynamic there. How were they as parents? Because we hear all the time about how Asian parents can be in terms of extremely strict or high expectations.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So do you know what an A minus is, Lee?
Non-satisfactory is what it is, right?
It's a Chinese F. I think my parents were probably pretty typical. They pushed themselves pretty hard. They never actually yelled and sat on my head to say, go study. But I think it was just this undercurrent that a lot of us felt. Even you guys, I'm sure, have similar stories. And this is very much common ground for kids in our brackets, right? Asian American minorities growing up in places where you are not around a lot of other Asian Americans. I definitely was always either the only Chinese kid where I was, or one of the only minority kids in my class. Even at Stanford, my personal claim to fame at Stanford is I was a walk on the Stanford sailing team. I was the first non-white kid on the Stanford sailing team, and that's probably one of my most I hate to say I'm proud of things because we're also taught to be very humble, but I'm proud of that one. After me, of course, they had Chinese kids who went to the Olympics in windsurfing in 420s, so they were a little better than I was. But like I said, going to the high school I went to, because my parents had no connection to the water. I always liked the water. I was a water baby. I signed up to learn how to sail at my high school, and I sailed all 4 years of high school. Getting to try out for the team as a walk-on, getting to be on the team for 3 years, that was a big deal for me.
Wow.
And just to make sure it's clear to our listeners, Joe's parents did not pay the sailing team coach to have him in midget Stanford. Yeah, different times. Okay, so fast forward to Stanford. What were some of like your most vivid memories from your time there?
Stanford was also a lot of fun, but this is where I think there's a seed of something we may talk about later if time permits. That I think any kid going to college in that traditional physical space, which is also changing now, even today,
Right.
would be a great experience. Wherever I would have gone, I think I would have enjoyed college because I enjoyed getting away from my family and getting my first sense of who I am outside of the context of being somebody's son. I think that's an experience that a lot of young people need to physically separate, to find their own edges. And I took advantage of that at Stanford. In fact, so this is the thing with college prep high schools is I came in with sophomore standing. So I actually finished my undergrad in 3 years. I actually got a master's at Stanford. That's why people on my bio, it says multiple degrees, because I didn't want to leave. I didn't feel like I was ready for the real world. And I said, hey, I'm done, but if I get a master's, can I stay? Because my parents were paying for this, right? So it's not like I could stay, just not take any classes. I did what they call a co-term. So while I was finishing my bachelor's, I started and finished a master's in a little over 4 because I came in as a sophomore because of my high school. So I got a little over 4 years, and I think I just needed to bake a while. It's still really stupid. This is a good example of not going against the grain, but just being stupid. I didn't know about this world, right? I didn't know about the world of the private sector and how people make money, and I just wasn't tuned into that. What I did was I went through like the interview process, and I was like, I got to get a job. I got a job, and then actually worked there a day. So this is stupid. This is what you should not do. I got a job at a major VC, Summit Partners. These guys were big. I didn't understand how big they were or how important they were in the Valley, but I was also in a relationship with a woman at the time. She was in a different city. And so I needed a job, but I also wanted a job near her. So what did I do? I took a job. I worked there for a day. I told the managing partner I was in a relationship and I wanted to be in this other city. I said, hey, I'm sorry, I got to quit. And he said, you are an idiot. He said, do you know how many people wanted this job? And do you know how many meetings I had to go through to make sure you got this job because I liked you and I picked you? He became the managing partner of Summit for many years. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, man, but like, I'm in love. And he looked at me and he laughed and he's like, you're going to have to make your own mistakes. And he said, but I guarantee you one thing, you will never go to Harvard Business School.
Oh,
And
Well, you got that one
I didn't
wrong.
even want it. I didn't even want revenge. I felt so bad about leaving this guy in a lurch because they were about to go to their annual shareholder meeting. Is a big ta-da. And I bailed and I literally packed up my shit. I had to figure out how to get out of my lease. I'd signed an apartment lease. I was such an idiot. I continued dating this girl for 3 more months and we broke up. And I needed a job. I left. So I had a job going out of college. This is in the 91, 92 recession too. So talk about stupid. If you're a younger person and you're listening to this, don't go to college, graduate during a recession, get a really good job, and quit for a girl.
going back to your question, how did you not understand that the gravity of what you were doing, considering you probably went through a ton of interviews in order to get this high stakes position, right?
My only explanation in retrospect, because I want to be really careful about rewriting history. The only thing I would blame it on to not, because you got to own it. I was just an idiot. I own that. That was really probably one of the biggest, earliest mistakes of my life. And it had nothing really to do with happiness other than I thought I would be happy if I left what I was doing to be with somebody that I thought I was in love with, right? So I'm like, I'm following my heart. That's the truest thing, right? It doesn't always work out that way. So I ended up getting a job in consulting. And at the time, Accenture was just a big firm. It wasn't necessarily a highly regarded. It's big. There's a number of great people there, but I was lucky because they were okay recruiting what they call off cycle. So I was off cycle and I needed a job and they were still hiring. They had an opening. I interviewed and I got the job. So I ended up working in San Francisco, which I loved, had a great time with a bunch of fellow alums, all newly out of college, all friends living in the city. Man, that was fun. Those were happy times. Again, reminiscent of my childhood pre-West Side, you're good at taking tests, like you should move. That was a good time. And that led me to Harvard Business School. And it's funny, I actually wrote in one of my essays about this experience because one of the questions at the time in your application was, tell me something about regret. And I said, interesting question. You want to talk about regret? And I started with the quote of this partner who was a graduate of HBS, which he did say, he goes, after all this, blah, 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 he laughed too. And he's like, you want to go for it? You want to do this for yourself, dude? Good. But you're never going to Harvard Business School. That was my lead quote for that essay. And I said, you know what? He's probably right. I hope he's not right about that one part, but you have to own your mistakes. You have to own your immaturity. And before you are in a position where you're making decision that controls other people's livelihoods, you need to be mature enough to make the right decision. So I'm glad I made that mistake at that age. I'm glad the only person it cost was me and a little bit of my partner, my partner for a day's ego. Because if the stakes had been higher, I could have hurt some people.
Right.
How did you had some type of work experience at Accenture? How did that experience affect you to make you realize of the mistake you made previously and wanting to go actually apply to Harvard Business School?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think even when you're in work, if you don't focus on it, if you make it a passing thing and your priorities are playing beach volleyball at Golden Gate Park, partying, quote unquote, networking, that was not a thing. That word today, it seems really important to a lot of younger people. That was not something that was really its own thing. You know, the number of people that you knew was not a currency to be traded. It might help you get into a party, but it wasn't something even then that I thought was supposed to be cultivated in a selfish, scarce kind of way. So what I did though learn was a lot about business. So working in consulting, doing studies, that became a really fun, that was a fun job. And it was fun because I realized and recognized something that I liked, which was problem solving. When you're an analyst at a consulting company, you are not really doing very much except the lowest level crap that other people don't want to do, where you're cheaper and they can build the crap out of you and make money off of you. But if you elect to put your mind into what you were doing, which I was, because I was actually genuinely interested in the business and the customers that we were studying. So for me, it actually got my brain functioning and the blood flowing in a way that I liked business then. I knew I liked that idea of creating something that solves problems. Like that, to me, like that, be able to build a machine that solves problems. Businesses are nothing more than machines that solve problems. And when they're well run and they're solving the right kind of problems, they make a lot of money.
So going forward to post HBS, I think this is when you actually joined PwC and started doing consulting, bringing companies to China, right? This was, I think, in post 96. So tell us a bit about that.
So the consulting gig after college, what was nice about consulting is I already knew how it worked and I got okay at it. So I had some skills. PwC had a program at the time where, because I did my summer there, they actually helped me with school. So my second year was basically paid for by committing to go back and work with those guys. So I really appreciate that. That was a good program. And I feel forever some great fondness to, at the time it was Coopers and Lybrand, but it became PwC. Yeah, I enjoyed China. It was crazy. We could do a whole other episode about how crazy China was at that time. Oh my God. It was a crazy place. And I love the crazy. I found it hard living. It's definitely different now. Back then they called it a hardship post. So I got a hardship post bonus. And I knew I wanted to come back. And I knew at that time, I knew I wanted to work for myself. That was when I realized that I could see a path to what partners did, because I'd spent enough time. And that was also enough time to know that I didn't want to end up there. So the Accenture piece, the word networking comes back. It wasn't on purpose. I had made a bunch of friends working at Accenture, and one of them became my co-founder for the business. So I came back to San Francisco because that's where my quote unquote network, my group of friends was. I'd reconnected with a buddy from Accenture, and it was the beginning of Internet One, and Yahoo was blowing up. So we started a company to do systems work. And I won't bore you with that. That is super boring, what we did, but how we did it was really exciting. And then another 4 years of my life goes by. It was crazy. So that's when I was on the TV show. That's when I was on the Today Show, Living Consequences. So as a young person, even though maybe academically I got good at funding a machine and creating a business, socially and personally, I was still probably a pretty immature high schooler that probably should have gone to a co-ed school instead of an all-boys high school.
I know you're downplaying it, but tell us a bit, because Zuma was at the time a very successful startup. I know that you guys came very close to going IPO. You mentioned that you had actually filed your S1. What did you learn from it? And prior to this podcast, you had told me and Will that through it all, up to this point, even at the height of Zuma, in your late 20s and getting so close to an IPO, you don't think that you were actually that happy. And looking back now, how does that change?
Yeah, this will be hard because there's no good answer that comes out of it that someone could probably get a soundbite of what to take away. Because of you guys, and I thank you for that. I thought a lot about it when I hadn't thought of in many years, and this is 20 years ago. And in thinking about it, I certainly had moments where I loved what I did. I found a sense of mission and purpose. I was good at getting people to believe in the story. So we raised $60 million from Silicon Valley VC, which at the time, I mean, today $60 million with pre-COVID with young people these days getting startup money doesn't sound like a lot, but
still a lot of money. Yeah.
It was a good amount of change. And we built an enterprise. We had real customers. We had paying customers. We were making things. And at one point, we had close to 500 people in several offices across the US, and we did file an S1 and we were going public. The joke was the gas was in the jets, but we hit right at the crash. So it went downhill fast and we were burning cash.
Give us like a 30-second overview of what Zuma did.
Okay. Basically, what cloud computing is today is not new. We were doing cloud 20 years ago. It was just called application service provision. We were an ASP. It was a budding market because in Internet One, everyone was still building systems from the ground up. It's, I want a house. No, there was no prefab. You had to basically grow trees, cut them down, make lumber, right? Crush rocks, find lime, make cement, and stand up your own website in a co-located, electrified, air-conditioned bomb shelter that cost $500 a square foot for just power ping and pipe. And we were one of the first companies, and actually we competed with Mark Andreessen's LoudCloud. So LoudCloud, before he became Andreessen Horowitz, he had a company called LoudCloud. It did the same thing. So when I remember friends of mine, former employees, when Amazon was doing AWS, man, I got so many messages laughing. Oh my God, look. And now they were obviously doing it at a different scale and they deserve all the success they have. But Microsoft Cloud, Google Cloud, that's basically what we did. We were basically cloud before the cloud.
Out of my own curiosity, like at this point in time, this is probably a pretty new concept, especially for enterprise, right?
Yeah.
Having to convince enterprise that, hey, we're going to actually hold your information.
Yep.
And it's going to be safe. How did you, number one, convince VCs to give such a young man this money and build this hard tech? And then two, how did you convince enterprise to basically trust you enough to actually provide them services?
So one of my team members, when they would hear me sell, said this once at a party. It's like, Joe Cha is a man who could sell you your own balls. And everyone laughed. And to answer your question, I really believed it. I said, look, this is how it's done today. To stand up a computer system, a web-based computer system in the internet, the paradigm was from IBM in the 60s. And so you just looked at the numbers and the time that it took. And I said, listen, speed is life. There's no time for you to waste growing your own trees to make your own lumber. I said, the internet is out there. .coms are here. What you need is are systems that are prefab, set up, have all the pieces, and you can stand up a web system. Keep your green screen, internal operation stuff, blah, 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 blah. But to be on the web, get on with us, and we're going to put you on the internet superhighway. And it worked. We had a run rate, I remember, because I was there. We had a run rate of $40 million. We had we had lots of people putting their web systems up on our backbone. It was a really expensive backbone. And when the funding went out and the .com crashed, most of our customers were other .coms. That hurt. And that's really what kind of knocked us sideways. So we ended up selling to a competitor who had raised more money. They ended up selling to, we all just basically got rolled up. We were a tiny fish. We got rolled up into a somewhat larger, smaller fish. We had some pretty good technology, and it became what is now Verizon Business Solutions.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. This was basically, you rode the wave right into
the wall.
The 01 financial crisis. And with that exit, what did you decide to do next?
I was exhausted. I asked some friends at Yahoo if I could basically have a job. I needed to park someplace to catch my breath. I'd put my heart and soul into something that technically got sold, but got sold for pennies on the dollar, really, and came away with very little personally, like practically nothing. And I just needed a place to hide out. And luckily, the company, Yahoo, really helped me out and gave me a place to stay. They gave me a horrible title, VP of Strategy. Oh man, that's a tough title to give somebody without a P&L. And I was it was a business unit. So it wasn't VP of Strategy for the entirety of Yahoo. That was something that I constantly had to explain to people. I didn't even like saying it because people would automatically say, oh, you're VP of Strategy of Yahoo, right? That's it. That's a huge job. And I'm like, no, that's not my job. But I was parked there and I was recuperating, getting some rest. And it was a place where a lot of post-IPO people, so when I say post-IPO, so Yahoo made an incredible amount of wealth for so many people for so long. But it was really mostly the pre-IPO guys. So post-IPO, a lot of MBAs landed there. It became more of a professional media company. A lot of the early people bemoaned the culture change. And I was what they called an FNG. I was a fucking new guy. So I was really there to just help do the work, carry the water. It was not as dynamic as it was in Internet One. Post-crash, Yahoo was a very different place culturally. It had already gone public. It had already seen a huge up and down. And it was like Pan Am. It was on its way into this long, slow descent into becoming part of Verizon. It was started back even then. The energy was gone. The CEO at the time was not a technologist. It stopped being a technology company at that time. But that's for another time. There's probably Yahoo alumni out there who can speak way more better than me about that.
I'm just a little bit curious about kind of your own emotions coming through that, right? So you started your own company, you raised $60 million. You guys are on the cutting edge of technology, bringing basically cloud services to the internet for all these big corporations or big companies. And you're the fuels and the jets, as you said. And then all of a sudden the dot crash happens. Can you just explain to me like what that felt like and how long were you? Did it feel temporary at the time, or did you know it was over immediately, or did it take some time? Like, can you just explain what that felt like?
So yeah, we're really exploring this. This is interesting. It was just exhaustion at the end. Imagine taking 4 years of your life and not doing anything else except one thing. An all-consuming thing. It doesn't love you back. It's not human. It's not even an animal. If you just loved your dog for 4 years, you'd have a dog that loves you back. But a company either makes you wealthy, or in .com land, you either make it or break it. There's very little ground for somebody who hits a single. Silicon Valley is not interested in you making a little bit of money. Silicon Valley wants you to go big or go home. Wow. How many cliches did we just fit into 10 seconds? So I played that game, and deferred gratification was a horrible life partner prospect to anybody or anywhere within 60 feet of me, because I was laser-like focus. There's another one, cliche, on one thing. And that was I called it getting to the other side. I don't even know if I really knew what the other side was going to hold. I just knew I wanted to get there and get my people there. And the saddest part, and this took me a while, this was the closest, there's no such thing as PTSD in business, but the emotions that I felt weren't over the money. I think that's one thing I realized as well, too. This counts for something later. I don't know if I'll have time now, but we probably won't. But I realized it wasn't about the money in the end for me. I really wanted this machine to live on. And the satisfaction I do have is it did. The stack that we wrote ran Verizon basically for years. The project manager, he was a project manager for me. He became the head of Verizon Global.
Wow.
Mike Palmer, stud. I love that guy. He was one of the best that we had. And the fact that he kept the guys together, there were 40 guys that went over to Totality, which got bought by MCI, which became Verizon. All those changes, there was a core group that stayed. That stack lived forever. I don't think it's there now. But the point is, I did get some satisfaction that even though I didn't profit from it personally, that stack lived. It never wrote me a thank you card. It never said happy birthday. It never thanked me. But that was something that felt good, which I even said to myself, I don't know if I'll ever feel this way again. And I never did. Now, what was sad? I convinced hundreds of people to work for the business. As the CEO, you are the chief recruiting officer. You're the chief sales officer. Like, in the end of the day, when it fails, you fucked up. And it sounds like, oh, that's egotistical. But really, people who sit in that chair, if they don't own it, they're just like corporate jockeys, people that used to work for GE and rotate around every couple of years as a professional CEO. I could never be one of those guys. Mm-hmm. I owned it, not in just an equity sense, but it was hard to separate Zuma from me, at least in my own identity. And when those people lost their jobs, I was crushed. Yeah. Now, 20 years later, I see them on Facebook. We have Facebook reunions. People like wear their t-shirts and they drink coffee in the Zuma mugs. There have been marriages. There have been children that came out of that company. In the end, life didn't change one way or the other. We didn't save anyone's lives. We didn't cure cancer, but we had a good time. And I guess what I learned from it was to do something that you care about is a gift. And even if it doesn't work out the way you plan it, if you live long enough, 20 years later, you come away with some friends and you come away with a lot of good stories. And hopefully you don't fuck up the same shit twice. When it crashed hard. So Silicon Valley is a boom bust, just like California gold rush. It's a gold rush mentality. When it busted, it was quiet for a while. And I spent, basically while I was at Yahoo, I moonlighted as a job placement. So much so that I actually went to talk to a recruiter, found me, one of the big guys. And they're like, hey, do you want to come over and do this? Because they had heard me placing people. And I was just doing it to assuage my guilt. And I was like, no, that's not my thing. And I think that was the right thing. But one of my COO became a partner at Russell Reynolds because he was doing it too. And that was very fulfilling. Yeah. And I love, David Fink, my COO. So where are we going? Why does this matter to anyone listening? I hope this is, man, they probably clicked off about 15 minutes ago, but I'm still having a good time. So thank you for letting me continue.
No, this is giving us a better idea about this first half of your journey. From Yahoo on, I think this is where we start digging into transitional change and the next chapter of your life.
So let's pretend we're going to do a mini 2-part episode because I think probably some people are probably bored as shit. So let's finish up with
sure.
Let's do the conclusion of chapter 1, which is, oh, hey, here's Joe Cha. He looks like the Asian version of Michael J. Fox on Family Ties, right? Wants to do business, go to business school, work consulting, Like that's all coloring within the lines, which I fully admit, absolutely. I was just not that thoughtful about it, and so because I didn't know, going along and doing what other people thought was a good idea was very reassuring because I didn't have to really consider it very much. I just I did it. But when my own oven timer went off about doing something on my own, that's when my life changed. And I learned something about myself. I started learning about myself. I call it, or I've heard it called as well, self-actualization. Who are you? I started to get to know myself when I did my startup. I wasn't, I don't think I liked everything in retrospect of who I became and what I was at that time. But I was young, I was stupid, I made a lot of mistakes, but I worked really hard and I cared about what I did. So the only reason I won't give myself an F for that fail is I cared about what I did. It wasn't about the money in the end. It really wasn't, because it came, it went, and that part just made me tired. The only part that was really hard for me was the people that I felt like I let down. And even that's probably just my ego talking. Like, they moved on, they all got jobs, everyone was fine. But it meant something to me to try and help them get jobs, and it meant something to them. For those that I did ended up helping, I placed a bunch of dudes, actually men and women, engineers, HR people. Like, I made it a point to help people find work.
Mhm.
And that was very satisfying, and that kind of helped me. What I got out of that was just, like I said, assuaging my guilt and kind of being able to move on from there. So was there happiness there? When I look back on it, I don't remember necessarily being happy outside of when I felt like we were really doing something. And I think that's more meaningful than happy, because I was exhausted. It wasn't on a really personal level. It was part of who I was at the time, because I was Zuma. And my ego was
Mm.
probably a little out of control. No, my ego was out of control. Yeah, for sure. I was probably not a nice, you guys think you like me now. You probably wouldn't have wanted to hang out to have a beer with me then, because if we weren't going to do some business, I was just not a pleasant person to be around, because I couldn't talk or think about anything else except my business.
Mm.
So yeah, that's basically chapter one, going with the grain, doing what I guess people did back then, which was start companies. Good Asian boy, work really hard, please people, sell, and then you're supposed to ride off in the sunset. But that's not what happened. If you're really interested and you want to know what really mattered in this story for this particular human
Tune
being,
in to part two.
stay tuned for chapter two.
Like you said, a lot of this was taking things as they came, but also, I think more critically, Zuma was the beginning for you of discovering yourself. You put your
Oh,
heart and
yeah.
soul into something that you completely identified with. And I think giving yourself an F is a bit harsh. There were external factors, obviously, that were
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
your control. But okay, so that closes chapter one. So what happened next? What did you do? How long did you stay at Yahoo, and what did you do after that?
So chapter two, dude, is when shit went sideways. Internet one, crazy, yeah, all the things, exhaustion, yeah, that was quote unquote rough in certain ways, but nothing uh, to prepare me for what happens next. Life happens.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's a cliche or not, but trust me, life happens. And I think to get, this is where I didn't say as a headline to where the end of this story goes. I think to truly know happiness, I mentioned the two sides of the coin, right? So my life's got two sides to it. My childhood had two sides to it. I think for me, happiness has two sides to it. I think to really know what happiness is and how to experience it and how to find it as a byproduct of what you're doing, which is another cliche of my personal cliches, you have to know what the other side of happiness is. And that is when you're not happy. And so I'm cruising along at Yahoo. Like, I have some Forrest Gump moments where I could have been employee two at LinkedIn. I was, the day I left Yahoo to go home, one of my friends got me an interview at Google to be a director of business development when they had 250 people.
Wow.
Um, and it would have been fine. Who knows? I just share those little anecdotal bites of, that's what life zings everybody with.
Mhm.
And you have those shoulda, woulda, couldas. But I don't think I would have been long for those places anyway. What happened to me is I'm an only child. I was a pleaser. The A minus was a Chinese F. And over the Christmas holiday, my dad basically had, previous to the holidays, he had begun a new life and a new relationship with another person who was not my mom.
Mm.
And coming on at Christmas, my family was not perfect, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. So I thought, people fight, people yell at each other. That's what people do. That's what married couples do. And so I didn't really ever think much of it. And I certainly never thought my dad would start another life and basically leave, but he did. And he picked a great time for it, right? What better time to do that than to ruin Christmas? So he basically left on the 23rd of December, didn't answer his phone. My mom thought he'd been kidnapped first. My mom's birthday happens to be Christmas Eve. That was a fun birthday.
Oof. Wow.
He calls me on the 26th to let me know that he's okay and alive. And I'm like, okay, thanks. What the fuck are you doing, dude? And he's like, I have a new life. I don't want to be with your mother anymore. I'm in Santa Barbara. So I'm like, oh, fucking great. So they began their process of getting a divorce. My mom couldn't accept it. I'm a pleaser, right? She's my mom. I care about her.
Mm-hmm.
So my personal life, my family life, not my personal life at Yahoo was fine. I'm just getting back out to partying, and my life in the Bay Area has some coherence to it at the time.
Mm-hmm. You were still single at this time.
Still single.
Okay.
And just not ready to have my parents become my children.
Mm.
But that's basically what happens. In the intervening months, I start flying home from Yahoo to take care of my mom. They go through a really bad patch where just craziness, you know.
Yeah.
She tries to get back together. She hires a private investigator. She tries to commit suicide. Just to the point where my aunt called me one day. It was a Friday. I still remember this. It was a Friday. When I quit Yahoo on a Friday. The morning my aunt called to say my mom tried to kill herself. I was like, fuck. All right. So I called my boss and I said, hey, I quit. Here's my situation. And he's like, shit. He goes, do you want to just take some time off and come back? That was his first reaction. And I'm like, you're super cool to say that, but there's no way I'm going to be of value to anybody until this shit gets sorted out. I said, it could be a couple of months. And he's like, oh, fuck. Okay, bye. So I quit. My friends helped me move shit out of my apartment over that weekend. And I was down Monday, basically living at home in my childhood bedroom, taking care of my mom
Back in LA.
back in LA.
Mm-hmm.
How old
And
were
that
you at
was
this time?
2002. So I was 30, 32, 33.
Wow.
Jeez.
And it was a shit show. It was a shit show. Every day, crying, hiding the liquor, hiding the knives. I looked like my dad to her, so she's throwing shit at me. Shit show. And pouring money down the drain with lawyers. And of course, I'm a practical guy. So I'm like, hey, we're going to do California traffic accidents. We're going to do a no-fault divorce because all you're doing right now, both of you are just pissing money down the drain, fighting with each other to try and to no end.
Explain to
And
us what no fault divorce means.
So basically, I divorced my parents with one lawyer. I
Mhm.
took the process to get them legally separated
Okay.
and to go through the process of a divorce with one attorney,
Mm-hmm.
which is not very common. Usually there's two opposing sides and they try to fuck you, which they did first and wasted a lot of time, effort, resources.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So hold on. Did you ever have any idea? Did this just completely blindside both you and your mom? It sounds
So-
like you previously there was, at least I don't know if you had any inkling that this was potential.
I knew they weren't happy.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a cryptic, like at Thanksgiving before this all went down, he and I had a very cryptic glass of wine. And he said, I remember that, and it was nothing more than a passing thought. So just to your point, it's a great question. You know, were there any signs?
Mm-hmm.
In this one moment, and I racked my brain because I had plenty of time to think about this shit. I racked my brain and I was like, oh my God, he was signaling in Thanksgiving. She had no idea. I had no real idea. But he said, hey, if you wanted to see me happy and I could be happy, would you be happy for me? And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right.
I'm like, we're drinking wine. And I'm like, of course, Dad. Yeah, if you could be happy. But I'm like, you're not happy now? And he just joked, he's, I'm with your mother. I'm like, oh shit, I understand. But that was in jest. I did not know about his other relationship. I learned later a lot about her. I refused to ever meet her. And it was only because, it wasn't because I didn't want my dad to be happy. I told him this. I said, as a man, this is when my parents became my children. As a man, you got to learn about consequences. Like my Harvard Business School essay, I was, my father had become my child. And I said, you motherfucker, if you had gotten the divorce before you had the girlfriend, you have any idea how different all of our lives would be? I said, you got your choices in the wrong order. And I said, by getting the girlfriend first and cheating on your wife, my fucking mother, I said, do you know what kind of a position that puts me in? we can't be bros and buddies here. You screwed the pooch. And I said, you're my dad. I love you. But shit, man, choices. And he was all messed up and he needed money. And he called me drunk at a bar. I'm like, that's really exciting. My dad's never gone to a bar. He called me drunk from a bar. And I'm like, great, I'm your dad. So anyway, yeah, Thanksgiving, there was an early indication, but I had no idea either.
Wow.
It was a surprise. Like
Mhm.
literally, who doesn't show up at your own house for Christmas? Of course, my
Yeah.
mom's going to worry that he got kidnapped or had a car accident. Of course, she called the police. Of course, she was worried. And of course, she got pissed when she found out he was in Santa Barbara with a girlfriend that he didn't know she had, that she didn't know he had. I
The
mean, that shit
timing
happens to
sounds
people.
horrible.
The,
Before
the,
birthday, before Christmas.
you
Couldn't have
just
picked
could
a
not
better
imagine
time.
the fuck you that was to their marriage. And
Mhm.
so it went thermonuclear. And look, people go through divorce. People have rough patches. I simply watched theirs courtside, and nothing prepared me for this.
Mhm.
Zuma was a great experience in and of itself. Working in Silicon Valley was an amazing time and place to be. I'm grateful for all that. Taking the left at Albuquerque to help my mom was not a choice. I didn't feel like I had a choice. It's like when you see a kid, it's like watching someone drowning in a pool. Like you don't have a choice to get in the water. It's just, you go. It was but it was shitty to live in that kind of space. So 2002, 2003, just probably the worst times of my life, the darkest, most unhappiest, suicide contemplating months, years, because their business was going south. I bought their business. I did their divorce. My dad constantly had money issues after that. Both of them got angry at me. Shit, when I bought the business, this was the most. So you want to hear a good one? All right. You guys grow up as kids. We all grow up as kids and we think, mommy loves us. Mommy
Mhm.
and daddy are always going to be here for us. That's true until they're not. When I bought the business, my own fucking mother, after we did the deal, right? This is grown up stuff. Like we have lawyers, we do paperwork, we assign things, and we exchange cash for those things. Yeah. She took an extra $650,000 out of the bank account of the company I had just purchased from her. Okay. Didn't tell me. Had the accountant, who was my uncle, not tell me until after all the paperwork was done.
Wow.
I get the next month's income statement, balance sheet, right? The financials. And I watch bank reconciliation, which is just what little mom and pop businesses have to do, because I've run businesses before. Like I know how to watch cash. And I'm looking at the cash. And I'm like, what the fuck just happened, Uncle John? Like, where's the money? And he's like, oh, your mother took it. And I'm like, you didn't feel like you needed to let me know? I couldn't say anything. And I said, Uncle John, I love you. You were my little league baseball coach. You're fired.
Wow. That's got to be extremely difficult. You're coming back trying
to help
salvage
these
what you can,
motherfuckers.
right? To help them.
Wow.
And that's what
It's like a
happens.
stab in the back
Right.
by people you
Yeah,
trust.
man. So your mommy loves you unless she suffers from narcissistic personality disorder and she claims temporary insanity and then has the balls to say, my mom has balls. She's like, oh no, I thought that was those are extra expenses that I thought I was owed. And I'm like, you realize that if you weren't my mom, I'd be filing a lawsuit and we'd be wasting more time with lawyers after 2 years of wasting time and money with lawyers for this little shitbird business whose number 1 and number 3 customers have just left us because you kept fucking talking to them about your husband. Mm. So it was a dying business. It had shrunk. We were losing customers. And yeah, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. She looks at me like stone cold killer. Go ahead.
Why did you buy the business?
They had no one else to. No one would have touched that business with a 10-foot pole. It had so many problems on it. It was a leper. That was their main asset. They had nothing to split. I said, shit, you can't sell it. I got to buy it so that you can have your divorce. There's no other way around it. So I bought the business because there was no one else to buy the business. And that's the other thing. I thought, okay, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to turn it around in a year. I'm going to sell it. And then I'm going to go back to Silicon Valley. 5 years later.
Wow. So you bought the business. And so at what point did things finalize between your parents? And I don't know if you had a chance to close that chapter and start focusing on turning this business around.
Yeah, basically. But it took 2 years, 2003, end of 2003, beginning of 2004. I fired my dad I fired my mom. I fired my uncle. I was alone with debt, a failing business, not making much money. I moved in. I didn't have the money to rent a place. Like all my money was tied into this piece of shit.
Wow.
I'm like, I got to make this dog hunt, or I'm gonna be poor. I gotta have nowhere to go.
Mhm.
I think I used that example before. I didn't have a moment where a chorus sang in the end and like light shone down on me where I found the way. It was just a dark slog by myself because I wasn't even taught. I'd done the separation. That they had other issues they didn't want to finalize on the divorce because of tax reasons. And I'm like, these are not my problems anymore. I stopped talking to them. Like I got them out of the business. They were poison for the business. Which was poison for themselves because they had nothing. They had nothing to fight over. Look, they were going to have nothing to fight over. So I said, fine,
Mhm.
I'm going to buy the business. I'm going to cash you two out. You're going to have your own independent lives. And by the way, all son filial piety debts have now been paid off. So fuck you, goodbye. Because I needed some space from those people. They were just
Mhm.
toxic human beings at the time. And I had nowhere else to go. I had no siblings, no girlfriend, thank God, because I would have been the shittiest boyfriend on the planet. I was alone. And that was dark. It was dark. And when I say dark, I just, you know, so when I lived at the office, the guys would have to turn on the alarm because my office where I actually slept was in the back. So I had no way out. Literally, I had no way out, physically out of the building at night. So when they turned on the alarm, I was trapped. I slept in the building until the
Wow.
next day when they let me out. So it was like prison. I didn't have time to even think about my happiness. I just had to make this work. And for those 2 years, up until 2004, it was like another Zuma with the exhaustion, but I had no help.
So once you bought the business from your parents and they were able to continue with the divorce, I know that you invested a lot of yourself and probably your personal money into it. Could you have actually just sold at a loss and perhaps gone back to Silicon Valley? Because 5 years, like that's a lot of time and effort that you put into that.
Yeah, if I
Was it
could have
also
found
some sort of
somebody,
nostalgia or
no, 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 not at
okay,
all. I did not
because
have
it belonged
any
to your
love for that
parents?
business at
Okay.
all. No, I did not. It literally was a clinical transaction where because I had put my money in
Mhm.
to get them out, there just wasn't enough there. I basically overpaid for that business. It just wasn't enough there. I had to put more into it to make it attractive to sell. So I did want out. I did want
I
to sell
see.
it,
You were just
but I couldn't have even sold it at a loss. It just had
yeah.
too much hair on it. I had just everything you learn in your MBA, I did on a microcosmic scale to do basically a one-man turnaround.
Mhm.
Pick apart, it was broken. Tons of deferred maintenance, bad systems, old process, like handwritten job bags to do stuff. It was just, oh man, it was rough. I think when you don't have a choice, or at least you say to yourself you don't have a choice, like I could have walked away for sure, but I convinced myself that
Mhm.
I didn't. And this is where I think it turns into better because I was on my own, because like I was trapped at night and sometimes it'd be me and me and a bottle of vodka that's almost empty because there's nothing else to do. I was alone. And I felt trapped. But at least what I was happy about was I wasn't around my family. I hate to say that. I love my parents.
That's rough.
I'm a loving person, but I don't like them. They really they screwed the pooch. They messed themselves up. They messed, they didn't mess me up. I got myself messed up into their world because I chose to go into their problem set. I felt that obligation,
Right.
which this was the best part. Talk about self-actualization and finding a way to be happy. Here's the crux of it. Here's how I found the first path steps towards being happy. I stopped giving a fuck about anyone else. I did the fix for me because my ass was on the line. No parents giving you a F or an A minus. No girlfriend telling you she wants to get married. I was lonely. Don't get me wrong. I would have loved to have been dating somebody, but I wasn't in a place. I had to get to that place. And I thank God because by 2004, 2005, I was there. So the business was coming around.
Yep.
I got new customers. It's like fixing a house. Like I did everything that a good little MBA is supposed to know how to do. Systems, accounting, new technology, new customers. I opened two new offices, like rebranded, got the energy up, new customer, everything you're supposed to do to fix a business. I did because I was trained for that. I wish I'd done it for more money in a better industry, but it was to where by '05 when I met my future wife, I was okay. And that's where I think when we talk about the happiness piece, and I was saying like in halves, the second half, even though it was still hard, it was a very different kind of hard from the Zuma hard. And I was exhausted when I sold the business in the end in '07, but I was really happy because when I sold the business, like we made some money, not fuck you money, not Silicon Valley money, but manufacturing money, multiple on EBITDA. And my my deck was clean. I didn't owe anybody anything. I had money in my pocket. I knew who I was. I didn't give a shit about anybody, and that allowed me to actually truly. This is like kind of corny, right? But the truth is, I had to be able to give a shit about myself before I could give a shit about my future wife.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is in the most positive way. I Because I was my own person, I knew exactly where my edges were at that point in my life. That's probably the first time in my life, and luckily I met the right person at that time when I was ready to be with somebody else, where I could be a partner, where I could say, "Hey, I know where you are, I know who I am, and if there's enough pieces that overlap that this all makes sense, dude, let's do it."
Yeah. So you mentioned also if we had met you back in the day when you were doing Zuma, and I've heard this from other mutual friends that you were a very fun loving guy, but when it got down to business, you were extremely intense and no nonsense, get stuff done. And you mentioned that I don't know if you dated throughout, maybe on and off. It sounds like you weren't actually ready to be able to appreciate and to view relationship with the same lens that you did when you met your wife.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a difference between self-actualized and selfish.
Mm.
And if you're not self-actualized and you are selfish, you are not like, if I see my daughters date a guy like me when I was at Zuma, I would say, run, girl, because you're going to have a shit time of it. If a guy isn't ready, analogy, there was a lot of alpha toothpaste still in the tube. So I was really running and gunning and young at Zuma Times. And I met a lot of really nice people, incredibly good women who certainly were too good for me for the shit that I was at that time. But I couldn't have really been a good partner to them because I just wasn't ready. At least in my own personal revisionist view of it as I look back, I was too concerned with my ego involved in this business. I was all about deferred gratification. I'm like, we're going to get not married. I wouldn't say that word, but I'm like, we could have a relationship after my IPO. Just an arbitrary thing like that. So stupid.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, just immaturity and really not knowing what I was really doing it for. Like I love the business, but an
Mhm.
IPO is just such a construct in the end. All of
Yeah.
business, milestones in
Just
business
another
constructed.
milestone, like you're saying.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can always move the goalposts on yourself. And I
Hmm.
think that's what some people in Silicon Valley, who knows, this is none of my business. I'm just a little country church mouse now in South Pasadena. But in Silicon Valley, I think a lot of people have this constantly moving goalpost, and I have many friends who are incredibly wealthy, incredibly successful, and they bitch about being poor. They use that word.
Right.
And I won't say anything because I respect how they feel.
Hmm.
But to my close friends, I do say, I'm like, you're full of shit. That word is a horrible word to use where you really are because you live the life that others dream of and you're not poor. To my friends, I'm like, hey, man,
Yeah.
don't you
But
fucking
bottom line
realize
is
it.
they're not happy, right? They're not satisfied. And perhaps they don't know there is no end goal in sight. And down the
Yeah.
line, maybe they'll look back and they'll appreciate what they have now. But at this moment in time, there's always more to be had.
I hope for them. I hope for your friends, mine, everybody who may be in that goalpost trap. I hope for them that they can find a way to get to their own place without having to go through the shit that I went through. Like I went through the shit to really figure it out for me. I'd like to believe that I did not have to go through that. Just because we only live one life. And so for me, going through that experience, like divorcing my parents and turning around a shit little business in a crap, declining, mature industry for a manufacturing business, man, I wish I had not gone through that and would still be able to say it, but I don't know. So for me, the against the grain part in this chapter 2 is I got to become happy by experiencing a few pretty dark years that were very so now for me, being married and enjoying my children and living a much chiller life, happiness comes very easy to me because I'm way self-actualized. Like I know my limits. I know where I'm at. I don't care if you like me. I don't care if anyone likes me. And frankly, there are probably some people at the school where my kids go who don't like what I have to say sometimes. But you know what? I don't give a shit. And that's a releasing feeling. That's
Mhm.
freedom.
Do you think if this never happened with your parents, if let's say either Zuma continued to do well and the crash never happened, or you stay in the Silicon Valley circles and continued down that path without experiencing something as traumatic as you did, do you think it's in a realm possibility that you would have found happiness in a different way?
I would have loved to have found out, believe me.
I don't know. I mean, it's a rhetorical
I wish so.
question, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a fascinating question that I will confess, for years I wondered what it would have been like. Which I don't do that anymore. And if it creeps in, I'm like, oh, my mind's doing it again. I should probably go get a drink. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. What ifs? What if I'd gone to work at LinkedIn?
Hmm.
The co-founders of LinkedIn were my dorm mates junior year.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
We went out to dinner and they told me about LinkedIn, and I'm like, this is awesome, but my parents are getting a divorce. I got to go to LA. And the Google thing, like, who knows? It's fun to think about. It's fun to think about if you could rewrite your past. Right? There are movies about that. Would I know? I'd like to think I would have eventually figured it out.
So you talk about selfish versus self-actualization. Could you define the two and what you mean exactly by self-actualization? Also, like the edges, you talk about knowing your edges are. Maybe you could just help me understand that a little bit more.
Cool, for sure. So, in now living my chapter 2 life, what I mean when I say self-actualized is having a very clear sense of what you are willing to do in your life. For you, for other people, for your kids, for your wife. Like I think someone who's self-actualized knows enough about who they are to say, I am not going to take that job which will require my family to move to Ohio, regardless of how much it would build my career, because my priorities and what I think are more important are having my kids stay in one place and live in one house and go to the same, high school, junior
Hmm.
high, et cetera, et cetera. A self-actualized person, I think, just knows what the trade-offs are and where the limits of those trade-offs aren't where they're willing to go. Because I think a lot of people consider those things, and what they do when you're not self-actualized. So I think that's a way to find out that definition. And this is where I'm talking about a hypothetical other person. So this could be bullshit. But I do think if you're not, you may say, I have to manage my career. I need to make more money for us. When that may not be true. You may just need to make that decision because you're insecure about where you are right now and you don't really know what you want to do. So taking a bigger, better, higher paying job with a better title on LinkedIn sounds like a good idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then how is that different from being selfish? I think selfish can be good or bad for people. And if you read The Fountainhead, which is a fucking overrated book in Silicon Valley, especially because people talk about, objectivism and I got to do stuff for me. I read the book. Being selfish in what I'm talking about is not that objectivist framework. What I talk about being selfish is when I was selfish, I didn't share myself personally with people because I didn't have to. And I was more concerned about what I was doing at that moment in time without even really thinking about it. I wasn't thinking about the impacts very much on other people. So I dated some incredibly wonderful human beings when I was running Zuma. I I was not a good boyfriend. And you're on audio, you can't see me cringe, but you guys can see me on screen. I'm cringing. You're watching my face cringe because I I wasn't nice to some very nice people, which I regret. And I chalk that up to being selfish. And I chalk that up also to being not self-actualized. I was making wrong trade-offs for me personally. And in the end, look, the ultimate pre-self-actualized moment for me was choosing to run and save my parents. Because I really do believe sometimes when I think about it in the end, they're adults. They would have been fine. People get fucked up all the time. They would have survived. No one would have died. My parents would have had a rough go of it, but they both made their own beds. I chose to jump in and try to be like a hero, and it was hard. It cost me 5 years of my own life. It cost me my career in Silicon Valley, or whatever I would have had if I'd stayed in Silicon Valley. And I needed to see a therapist about that. But the gift in the end, what I can take away from it, which I hope is something that people who hear the story can take away from this, if anyone's interested this far in, thank you for staying this long. It's that once you do finally get there, and for me, that mountain was when I'd sold that business, good riddance. When I finally unshackled myself from that business and from my parents, I was very happy. I was very relieved. And frankly, it set me up to be able to open my life up to really sharing it as I think, a decent human being, to be a good husband and to be a good dad. Because now I'm able to give from that place, from my heart. Does that make sense? Because I'm okay. I don't owe anybody anything. I don't have anything hanging on me. My decks got cleaned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I asked you that question about the what ifs because personally, I don't feel like it's possible to often appreciate what you have until you lose it, until you hit rock bottom, right? And that's been your story, is that you had to go back and by choice too, right? You made that choice to go and bring all this onto your own shoulders, pour everything of whatever you had left after Zuma into this business and finally relieving yourself to be able to
Oh,
start your next chapter.
oh yeah, for sure. So the analogy, you could have cliche, layers of an onion, but peeling something back, that analogy of peeling back. I personally had to lose skin, flesh, bone. I had to get it burned until there was nothing left. Like I was ash in that process. I'd given a lot. Zuma was a lot professionally, but like I said, personally, I was just tired. It didn't hurt. I felt bad for the people, but I didn't learn. I didn't go completely to ash. It was just a long run. It was a boot camp for the next thing. So 4 years at Zuma, 5 years at ColorScope, that business, almost a decade of slogging it. When I finished, I was ready just to be with my wife and have a family, and I don't need fancy clothes. I'm wearing a YMCA t-shirt right now, and it's very comfortable. I live in a modest home. I love it. It's full of memories. I
So,
live in a modest neighborhood. Nice
yeah,
people.
yep. So, fast forward to today, what is there a relationship to speak of with your parents, and what is that like?
Yeah. So my parents, obviously, people get old. They slow down. My dad has cancer. I would say the relationship, because I have children and I want my children, regardless of how I feel about my parents, I want my children selfishly to have a relationship with grandparents. And my wife's family, my in-laws, are overseas in China. So, we're in the same town. If it weren't for my kids, I don't know that I would see them very much, if at all. But the kids really enjoy my parents. My parents love my children. I, I, because I've chosen it, I could have gone another way, but this was a self-actualized choice. I said, all right, this isn't, I don't want to live on the West Side near them. We're 40 miles apart. And I would say it's okay. It's not Norman Rockwell, but the kids are good for everybody. And I'm happy. I'm
Okay,
happy for them. I don't bear them any grudges. I'm not angry at them anymore. All that's more than 10 years ago now. It took a while, but
got it.
life moves on.
If there
And
is someone that's going through what you're going through earlier in your career or hasn't gone through that self-actualization process yet, what kind of advice would you give them to to get to where you're at now?
I wish I could say something that someone could use to get there, but if 50-year-old Joe came to 30-year-old Joe and told him this self-actualization story, I'm sure 30-year-old me would have been like, oh, thank you so much. And then moving on,
Right.
because my ears weren't ready. I think my only advice would be to say, you may not think this makes sense now, but if you hear it and you listen to this advice, you're going to realize at some point in your life that this is true. So, at least if you've got it there and you're holding it like on a back shelf in your mind palace, it might come in handy. And those words would be, what you do is less important than how you do it. And that is less important than doing it for yourself. That's what I would say. You want to be in commerce, you want to be a lawyer, whatever you want to do, fine. Do a good job. But the most important thing, if you want to be happy with what you do, because happiness is a byproduct of your outputs, make sure you're doing it for yourself. Because otherwise, you're never going to be happy. And it doesn't matter how much money that work, that time yields to you, no amount of money will account for you doing something that you don't like, because life is short. I'm 50. My rice is cooked. If I haven't figured that out now, I'm in trouble, because I only have a couple good years left before I get cancer or lose my vision or maybe something happens to me. At my age, I've had friends who have died. My friends, not my parents' friends, of cancer, of random acts of God. And so I guess that would be it, here's the soundbite. Not that important. How you do it, that's pretty important. Like, do a good job. Don't be a dick. To be happy, at least, to enjoy what you do. But if you don't do it because you're choosing to do it, that is a guaranteed recipe to not be happy. And so sometimes you can find it by avoiding what's not there. I don't know, that didn't make sense by the Dr. Seuss thing, but just what you do, okay, do something good, do it well, but make sure you do it for yourself.
Yeah. To your point, Joe, also, some of this does come with maturity and with age. There's certain things that cannot be taught or just picked up through a conversation. Hopefully people listening to this will be able to pick up on it sooner than later. If it would have
Sure.
took them 2, 3, 5 years to realize that they're doing something that makes them completely miserable, it's not what they want, that they'll realize it and change paths, hopefully, and do something for themselves earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think these words will hit at the right time for the right person.
Yeah.
It's just like a book, right? When you're not ready for the book, it doesn't change your life. When you're ready for the book, it does change your life. And your words have greatly impacted me. I remember when I first met you, I came over to your house and I was talking about my situation, which wasn't as bad as your situation, but it was similar. There were similar like themes, right? And I came and I started crying, and you told me a little bit about, I didn't understand the depth of the information you had to share based on this conversation, but you told me a little bit about what your thoughts, and it really helped me, at least in my life. I think it'll help others as well.
I'm humbled. I'm super glad that I got to be part of this experience. I'll end by saying one of my own personal cliches, which is the good news about free advice is that it's free. The bad news is you get what you pay for. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. I hope someone else does.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
So lastly, absolutely, we just want to give you a chance to also, if there's anything else you wanted to add for our listeners that are inspired by this podcast, by what you had to say, and perhaps want to look you up, where can they find you?
Oh, sure. Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm because I knew the guys at the very earliest stages. I'm just Joe Cha on LinkedIn. I have no number behind it. So if you find me on LinkedIn,
okay.
And why would you find me on LinkedIn? I'm of very little value to people because I don't do anything anymore. But if you feel like you need to talk to somebody and you can't afford a therapist, you can call me.
Okay. If anyone is interested, reach out to us and we'll try to put you in touch with Joe. Okay, so thank you so much, Joe. I think this has been educational and inspirational time that you're willing to share with us. And we really thank you for being with us today.
Gosh, I hope so, fellas. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. Be safe out there.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.